Hello everyone, my name is Robbie D. Smith. I live in Florence, Oregon on the Pacific Northwest coast. I've been here for 8.5 years. Prior to that, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma for 22 years. And prior to that, I lived in England after being a missionary on 3 different continents. And at times I come across very interesting conversations, of which I have one here that I found on YouTube. And it's titled Gender Transition for Children Debate with Ali Stuckey and Desmond Fambrini. So Ali is a very conservative, evangelical Christian lady with those values who's done a lot of studying on this subject. And Desmond Fambrini is a non-binary person who's also a teacher on this subject. So it's a very healthy, long conversation. Lasts over 2 hours, so I'm going to split it into 30-minute sections, including some times where I am going to interject, so you'll see me appear on the screen talking about 1 or 2 of the things that I felt are very relevant to the conversation. So first we have approximately a 4-minute introduction before we get into the actual debate. I hope you enjoy the series. And a little advisory note here, these subjects that we're going to go into are pretty deep at times, and for some that still may be sensitive on this issue, it could be kind of triggering. So just let you know up front, just in case, to be prepared if you go ahead and listen. Thank you.
Are children capable of making this kind of life-altering decision?
My answer to that question would be unequivocally no.
You need a doctor's opinion, parent surveys, significant amounts of therapy, and then, once every box is checked, to make something that drastic.
I brought together 2 thoughtful advocates with very opposing views on the topic of gender transition for kids, one of the most contentious topics of our time.
Conducting genital surgeries on minors based on, quote, thought leaders in the field? This is horrifying.
The real cruelty here is how minors are being butchered by doctors who put profit over protecting our kids.
A rise in anti-LGBTQ+ legislation.
If you are forcing a trans child to go through puberty when they are trans, that is tantamount to torture.
This really is life-saving care.
Ali Beth Stuckey is the host of the conservative Christian podcast Relatable, who's passionate about helping women build their worldview upon the Bible.
I am an author, a podcast host, a commentator, a wife, and a mom. I don't care what the Washington Post or the New York Times or any left-wing activist has to say about how that's healthy conversation to have with a kid. No, that is a form of grooming.
There's so many people who are intimidated into silence.
This idea that I am the center of my universe, that the individual is the only thing that matters, that we're not created for a greater purpose, that there is no absolute truth. But as it turns out, human beings are wired to look for truth. I think it is objectively, morally, ethically wrong to mutilate your body, in particular as a child. And it's going to sound really scandalous, but I do not believe in transgenderism.
Desmond Fambrini is a public and private school teacher who is a learning specialist with a Master of Science from Johns Hopkins University, who began his journey in education after graduating from Dartmouth College, where he double majored in government and gender studies.
Desmond Fambrini, he, him, gender fluid, bisexual.
I was assigned male at birth. I am non-binary, specifically gender fluid, but I am biologically male.
Given the right environment and the right kind of focus on academic achievement, it's really insane what can be accomplished. The first day, I had 25 students. By day 2, I had 19, because 6 parents switched out of the class because they saw me, and they were like, there's no freaking way, before I even got a word in.
Desmond, what do you want to say?
I know it's hard to remember, but we actually are on the same side.
I am a chatty person. Let's see if anyone else has something to say. I don't think my existence is confusing or scary. I don't think trans existence is confusing or scary. I don't think we need to get rid of gay teachers. We don't need to get rid of trans teachers. We don't need to get rid of all trans books.
Has transitioning become a social media trend?
Yes, it has become popular. Having some kind of obscure or different identity can be a social contagion.
It's not something that you do for fun.
We discuss if sex is assigned at birth.
I so see that perspective, and I've never understood that before. Thank you for explaining that to me. Yeah. I don't agree with you, but I get it.
does a medical consensus always equate to what's right and true? What about detransitioners who regret their transition and live with lifelong consequences?
This is the moment that we all became victims of so-called gender-affirming care. My childhood was ruined, along with thousands of detransitioners that I know through our networks.
This is the face of an almost 30-year-old man. When is the trans community going to take accountability for leading me down this path?
And I really thought about my future in ways that I was just not capable of at the time. I kind of had an oh shoot moment that I could have really damaged that chance.
When I talk about being too far gone, this is what I mean. And it just keeps getting worse. I don't really see being able to come back from what's happened so far.
How can we support people with gender dysphoria?
There is at least a 40% decrease in suicide rates for those given gender-affirming care.
There's no way for us to know statistically if what you're saying is true.
What an incredible and, dare I say, beautiful conversation between two respectful and kind individuals. All that and more on the Ellen Fisher podcast.
Okay, so put your seatbelts on. Here we go.
Thank you guys both so much for being here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while.
Yes.
And before we start, Desmond, do you want to share a little bit about why you're wearing sunglasses?
Because
I know
fish today.
People are going to ask. People are going to ask.
It's actually very on subject because we're talking about gender affirming care. And as a 30-year-old biological male, my hairline starts to go back a little bit, and you can get a procedure done that's a feminizing hair transplant where you get it more circled out, which leads to a good amount of face swelling, which I'm not embarrassed about, but just to keep the glasses on. But if you have any questions about that, let me know, because I feel that we don't see the process. We just see sometimes the finished results of these situations, or we see the perfect, they went into surgery and everything worked out great, but there's the bruising and all of these things. And I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm also saying know all the information. So I was very happy to kind of show that perspective, but with glasses on as well.
Do you have anything you want to ask him about that?
Not necessarily, not yet, but maybe we'll get into it a little bit more once we start talking about procedures and things like that.
Definitely.
But for now, I'm good.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. So my first question I'm going to pose, I'll start with you to answer, and then you can reply.
Sure.
Allie, is should children under the age of 18 be legally allowed to transition with medical interventions such as puberty blockers, hormone therapy, or even surgery like removing healthy breasts of girls? And are children capable of making this kind of life-altering decision?
Wow. So first of all, that's a spectacular question. And I think that there's so many nuances within the question that it's a question that I can't say yes or no to, because in my opinion, it is actually circumstantial, right? So maybe if I was able to break down the question into maybe a more specified kind of topic. So for example, let's talk about puberty blockers, right? Could that be something that is used in kind of the medical field to give gender affirming care to? Well, we have the studies, right? We say that, we see kind of, a fairly 90% kind of effective in not necessarily curing the depression, but an improved sense of self when a child with kind of gender dysphoria is given gender affirming care. That seems to be fairly good. We have people like the American, Psychiatric Association, Trevor Project that are all saying it tends to work fairly well. We've used puberty blockers for precocious puberty for decades before. We don't know all of the long-term effects yet. That's fair. But this is one of those times where I tend to go with the specialists, the endocrinologists, the child psychologists, and it seems like that would be a fair kind of intervention method. But I'm of course willing to hear other perspectives.
I would say, unfortunately, a lot of those institutions and the people in those institutions are captured by a particular ideology that really sacrifices the well-being of kids. So my answer to that question would be unequivocally no. Before the age of 18, your frontal lobe isn't developed. Your frontal lobe isn't developed until you're 25 years old. And that is very important for understanding the long-term consequences of your actions. So if you're thinking about puberty blockers, 10, 11, 12 years old, you certainly do not have the ability yet to understand the long-term consequences of what you're putting your body through. Not only your body, but also your mind actually requires puberty to be healthy. So to grow up, for maturation, not just physically, but also mentally, you need puberty. To be fertile later on in life, you need puberty. And so boys in particular who go through puberty blockers and they stop that natural process of puberty, they are especially risking their future fertility. And of course, typically this leads to cross-sex hormones, which is chemical castration. And so you're talking about, in many cases, irreversible procedures and processes that kids cannot consent to because they do not have the mental ability to understand the long-term repercussions.
I love everything you just said. And I really, first of all, I appreciate when you talk that I could tell that you care for what the welfare of the children are, right? So I first of all appreciate that perspective. I do, in my personal opinion, get worried because I have my master's of science in education from Johns Hopkins with a focus in neurodiversity, right? And I see a lot of statistics like this get thrown around and they're very out of context, right? That idea of like, well, the frontal lobe is not developed until you're 25. Due to neuroplasticity, your frontal lobe is not fully developed ever, right? And if we said, oh, you can't make decisions until you're 25 because your frontal lobe is not developed, we wouldn't hold people accountable since the age of 18 for doing random crimes. We still put people in juvenile detention facilities. We don't say, oh, well, your frontal lobe isn't developed, so you can't make that decision yet, right? We hold people can drive at 16, right? We don't say, oh, your frontal lobe is not developed, you're not able to actually operate a car. No, we let people get into a car at 15 and a half, right? And that puts people like a ton at risk, right? So I just see a lot of these statistics being like, oh, well, the frontal lobe is not developed until 25. One, not true. Two, that's not necessarily scientifically relevant when it comes to neuroplasticity or neuroscience. Furthermore, that idea of like, okay, well, chemical castration, completely different, right? Also, I again appreciate that you're kind of going towards that idea of like, oh, well, it's about fertility and it's about making not everyone's focus is fertility. And like, you were saying, as somebody who's conservative, Catholic, I so appreciate that.
Not Catholic. I just want to clarify that. That's okay.
I'm so sorry. I sincerely apologize.
No, that's okay.
So my family, I was going to say, is Catholic, right? Desmond Dela Cruz Fambrini of the Cross. So I completely understand that focus in fertility. And again, I apologize, but maybe that's not everyone's focus. Like maybe some people's focus. I would love to hear your thoughts though.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving that perspective. And I love to know your background and how much you know about neuroplasticity and things like that. And so obviously it's true that we allow young people to make some decisions. Now I would be for conversations about kids getting their driver's licenses later or raising the age of when kids enlist in the military, 18 years old. But that to me doesn't justify allowing them to make these kinds of decisions that will have long-term repercussions. It's not the same thing as allowing a young person to drive a car. Of course, there are decisions that we allow young people to make. It's not like we treat them like children. As you said, we do hold them liable for some crimes that they commit. But when we are talking about altering and stopping a natural and necessary process for the human body, like puberty, when we are talking about injecting a young person's body with hormones that are not naturally created by their body, we are talking about, again, long-term, lifelong repercussions. Yes, possibly fertility, but also the for example, like the decay of the uterus when you have too much testosterone in your body as a woman, all different kinds of physical maladies that come with trying to change your body into what it can never be. I just don't think that young people who so often have other mental health diagnoses really have the ability to make those decisions.
And here I can only but agree with what she's saying. Because there is really insufficient data regards to long-term effects on youth and pre-adolescence people going on long-term hormone changes and exactly how that fully impacts the body. So yes, this is also a concern of mine as well. And of course, the other party did point out that this is something that is not done just by the youth, the individual themselves, that there should be a whole load of hoops to go through, both from primary care to psychological evaluations as well, and to take into consideration any other forms of mental deficiency or variation in that person as well.
I've talked to, and maybe you have too, so many detransitioners who at the time that they transitioned or tried to transition when they were a teenager or maybe even 19 years old, they got the double mastectomy, they went on the testosterone, they thought for sure at that point that they will never, ever, ever want kids. No, I don't want to be a mom. Right. I'm a man. And then not only did they detransition and realize, oh, I want to be a mom, they realized, oh, I really want to breastfeed. Yeah. Now I can't do that. And unfortunately, the adults in their life had the same mentality that kind of you just expressed, that Well, if you can drive a car, you can decide to cut your healthy breasts off, and now they're living forever with that guilt. I think we can do better as adults to help guide kids in a better direction.
Can I actually respond to that? Because I love that idea. So,
okay, she's obviously coming from a particular foundation point of view. That's pretty obvious, which I'll go into more later because she brings the whole subject up. But as regards to detransitioners, the percentage is statistically very small. A very single digit. I think it's somewhere around about 3 or 4%, but I can't have the actual data at my fingertips for that right now. She makes it sound like it's very common and happens all the time. No, it doesn't. In fact, when I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, doing a lot of research and trying to meet as many people as I could, I found one detransitioner, and that person was being highly used by the conservative church as a figurehead that's, transgenderism isn't real and it's a deception and a lie and you need help. So, which is where she's coming from, of course. So let's find out what Desmond has to say on this.
How would you consider kids cannot make that decision on their own, but with people they can? Because that's what I think. I don't think a kid should be able to wake up and call me controversial. And actually, multiple people in my community don't like me for this, right? But if somebody at 16 is depressed, diagnosed with depressive, and they go, I want to transition, and I don't want the double mastectomy, I don't think they should be able to get that immediately. I think there should be, just like the American Psychological Association says, significant screening. You need a doctor's opinion, parent surveys, significant amounts of therapy, hormone blockers to extend the amount of time that could actually be, where this can be considered. And then once every box is checked, to make something that drastic, because you're talking about a drastic decisions that, in all fairness, and I hope this doesn't come off as tongue in cheek, you talk about are lifelong effects. Statistically, most of the lifelong effects tend to be positive statistically, right? Like you say, like, oh, well, I've talked to so many detransitioners. Literally, knee surgery. We have a, higher rate of regret for knee surgery than we do, gender affirming care, right? Hair gender affirming care actually has without exaggeration, 100% approval rate in the trans community, right? We can look that up on something like Alexa even. But with that said, right, how do you feel about people coming together to make these decisions, just like we do when a child needs some other type of support, whether it be a physical disability, learning disability? We come together as a community, medical community, educational community, vital, parent, come together and we make that decision like as a team. How would we, does it have to be an unequivocal no? Can it be no in some and yes in others?
And here we're about to see where her doctrinal beliefs cut in above the medical reasoning.
Unequivocally, no. Unequivocally, no, okay. Because there are, of course, things that even if you had the consent of a child and you had everyone saying, yes, absolutely, let's cut this child's legs off because they identify as someone without legs, we could still say from an outside perspective, you know what? No, that's going to be wrong. That's going to be harmful for that person. It doesn't matter if everyone and their mom says that it's okay. Everyone with a white coat is saying, yes, that's great. Someone from an outside perspective, even without those credentials, can say it's not right to cut someone's healthy legs off because we don't like the consequences and the repercussions of that. And so that's what I would say there. And I also just wanted to clarify something. You talk about the rates of regret. One, I don't actually think that we have very good data on that. We don't have very good statistics or reliable information on just how much regret is out there. Plus, it's really hard to be a detransitioner that speaks out because you get a whole lot of hate from the community that you were once a part of. And so I don't think that we have good, reliable information on that. But I am not basing my disapproval of and disagreement with transition on the rates of regret or not. I think it is objectively, morally, ethically wrong to mutilate your body, in particular as a child, whether or not they want it, think it's great, think it's awesome for the rest of their life. I am never going to be for the blocking of the puberty of or the chemical castration of a young.
And then I think like the last question is, I guess, first of all, you're an amazing speaker and I love listening to you. And I think that you put your
you too.
points
You're very
really
articulate,
right? So I, first of all, really appreciate how you're also listening to what I'm saying and like addressing, because I feel like a lot of people don't actually listen to the other perspective. I think what you said was really important, right? And that idea of, oh, you said it in such a beautiful way, like morally, ethically, logically wrong or something like that. But I guess I get confused because yes, you're right. There is data and the data may not be perfect, but I guess I get confused on where your paradigm comes from, right? Like you clearly are looking at the situation from a certain perspective. And I look at the situation and I go, well, one, I've had this experience, right, as a genderqueer individual, but two, I've done the research, right? And I'm sure you have as well. So this is where I get my perspective. The data says that we got the 90% kind of increase after they give gender affirming care, decrease in suicide rate by 40%, less suicides, overall, overall, it seems like a positive thing that's occurred. We got, endocrinologists saying this, psychologists saying this, the teachers are saying this. And then also on top of this, we have basically every world country that has said yes to gender affirming care and allow transitions and allow transgender individuals. We have not only higher rates of happiness in these countries, but higher GDPs, because it also causes like a prevention from psychological intervention that's needed later. It actually increases overall like GDP per capita per individual, right? So I'm just looking at it from economic perspective, psychological perspective, endocrinologist perspective, teacher perspective. And I hear your moral perspective, but I don't see why.
So now we have Desmond catching on that there's a fundamental foundation that she's operating out of. And I don't think by the end of this this video, she actually makes that quite clear what that is. But I will tell you now, because I've come across it 1,001 times, she is a very traditional believer in a particular interpretation of the Bible, which is very crystal clear and is not really debatable. In the book of Genesis, at the beginning, God says he made man in his own image. He made them, male and female, he made them. And so that's as far as they go. And so they just take that line and say, okay, so therefore, anything that is a deviation from that in physically, mentally, whatever, is against God and is part of the fall of mankind into sin. And you will find throughout the whole thing that's where she comes from. But I'm about to tear that to pieces probably in the next video.
Why?
Yeah, let me respond to that, because I am so impressed by your recall and your ability to articulate your argument. So thank you so much. So I do want to address a couple things that you said. One, this idea that people who transition have lower rates of suicide than people who are maybe not able to transition, or someone doesn't use their quote unquote correct pronouns. Again, why we don't have, well, I added that. You didn't say that, but I added that because that is something that we hear a lot, that social affirmation is important to help prevent suicide. And so you didn't say that, but that is kind of a stat that's thrown around a lot. And the reason why we don't actually know that, Trevor Project loves to say that, is because when someone commits suicide, we don't know why. And so in order to say that authoritatively, while this lowers the rate of suicide, we would need to know why exactly those who say didn't transition or weren't socially affirmed, why they did commit suicide. It's kind of a correlation causation fallacy. We're assuming that they committed suicide because, they weren't affirmed or they weren't allowed to transition. We don't actually know that unless they left a note, which most people don't, unfortunately, who die by suicide. And so very often, people who say that they're confused about their gender or that they identify as the opposite sex, they very often have other mental health issues. They very often have other trauma, and that is simply true. And so there's no way for us to know statistically if what you're saying is true, that it prevents suicides or lowers the rate of suicide. We just don't know.
Again, I wish I had some actual data in front of me, but it's not just the Trevor report. The reports reduce. It's not only the actual suicides, but it's particularly attempted suicides, which obviously the person stays alive and the reason can be determined at the same time. So she's trying to negate and invalidate valid feedback and research, even to the extent the last major survey was done with over 18,000 transgender people, and this is adults and youth participating in it, including subjects of attempted suicide. Obviously not actual suicide because they couldn't complete the survey, but certainly reduced rates of attempted suicide when there is the full support and they have been allowed to transition. So she's kind of doing her best to negate any positive data that's coming out regarding this.
And then I also just want to address that economic point when you're talking about places like Sweden, for example, that are very affirming. Actually, the biggest study on suicide of people who identify as transgender comes out of Sweden. And what they found was that the suicide rate did not decrease after men specifically tried to transition into women.
So she is not fully accurate here as regards to the Swedish report. The Swedish report actually was non-conclusive and did stress that there was other primary possible factors for the reduction in suicide and suicide rates. And so because there's too many variables, they couldn't bring any solid conclusion. It did not negate it or confirm it. And I will do my best on this video to drop a link to a report that goes into this Swedish report in detail.
And that's probably the most affirming country that we have, and the best data that we have from that country actually says, yeah, and I can provide the links and people can check it out. I know it's hard to like talk about studies in the moment because it's like, where's your source? And we can't do that extemporaneously, but I would, be happy to look at your studies and you can look at mine and all that stuff. And so, that's what I would say. That's what I would say about that is that in places that are very liberal and affirming, we actually don't see a difference in suicide rates. And it's also a correlation causation fallacy because, of course, we don't know what's really causing the suicide.
This is a great topic and we can stay on this all day, but it's just that idea of, I think I get a little bit confused though, because your first argument, that idea of, well, it provides a decrease in suicide, but we can't really tell what the decrease is. And I heard that point that you made.
I don't know if it decreases suicide.
Okay, so hear me out. And this is just me asking, right? That idea of like, well, you can't tell if it decreases suicide. We have multiple studies. And then I actually want to hear your opinion on something that almost is arguing against me, but I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
That idea of, we have multiple studies that say that there is at least a 40% decrease in suicide rates for those given gender affirming care. 40% decrease in suicide. You said, well, you don't know why they're not committing suicide. It doesn't technically matter. If something is statistically relevant, it's a 5%, right? So 5%, it's static relevance. If you do any type of kind of statistical analysis, right? If you have a static relevance, if you are over 5% in most case studies. So it doesn't matter the reason they didn't commit suicide. If you have a group population, transgender individuals, this amount of them gets gender affirming care, this amount commits less suicide. Doesn't matter the reason. It's relevantly, it's connected, it's 5%. But I think my question, and this one is going to be interesting, right? And here's where we get into the dark waters, where it's no longer like her versus me, is like 40% still kind of low.
So Desmond is spot on here with his reply. And he's absolutely correct. Even though we don't know exactly why each individual that could have committed suicide didn't, what we do know is there's about a 40% decrease according to those statistics, which makes it statistically relevant.
You know what I mean? Like, that's not good. That's not good. Yeah. Like that. So what do we do about that? Because that freaks me out. Like, and I think this is the gray area that we don't explore, and we never get past this point, because that's what freaks me the heck out. Like, if the statistics in the studies said, hey, we have transgender individuals, and this is 2020 study, right? They go, 72% of transgender youth, right, experience happier lifestyles after gender affirming care, but 72% still experience depression. I'm like, what the hell? Sorry. What type of study is that? And that was, I think, done by the Trevor Project, right? And I'm like, first of all, in 2018, we had a 90%. 2018, 2019, I will check the study. 2018, 2019, we gave a kid gender affirming care. They essentially had the same mental health as everyone else in the general population, aside from higher tics of anxiety. 2020 and 2021, we do the same study. 72% are still depressed.
That's
what just happened. Like, I actually, that's why I wanted to talk to you guys, because I'm like, something's wrong. Like, my statistics that I'm naming aren't adding up. So I want to know, how do we fix this, in your opinion, though?
Yeah, I don't know if I can give a solution for how to fix it. What I've found, and this is true when it comes to studies that seem to support my opinion,
Right.
or if someone is coming from a liberal perspective, a study that seems to support their opinion, so often the headlines and the conclusion and the summary, as you probably know very well, of a particular study, it doesn't actually bear out when you look at the conclusions. This was true during COVID with masks and things like that. Like the news, they would run with headlines and then you would look at the summary of the study and it would say like masks cut deaths in half at, elementary schools. And you'd be like, whoa, that's crazy. And then you would go into the methodology and then you would break down the data and you'd be like, wait, that's not actually what it shows. And in the study that you're referencing, if I remember correctly, if we're referencing the same study, they weren't actually able to see any kind of mental health or suicidal ideation difference in the two groups of people who transitioned and didn't transition. And again, we'll have to both look at that to make sure that we're looking at the same thing. I think the point is, though, that you're making is that there's competing data. And so what is the truth of it? And that does get complicated if you're looking at it from a perspective of, well, what just makes people happy?
Right.
What makes people feel good? And while of course that matters to me, it does. I don't want anyone committing suicide, no matter what they believe, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I agree with their choices or not. I don't want that. But I'm not only looking at it from that perspective. I'm looking at it from the perspective of biologically, there is male, there is female. It is actually impossible to change your sex. We probably agree on that. It sounds, because you said biological
You can't
male.
biologically,
So, yes,
you can certainly identify and can be respected, right? In my opinion.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that
Yeah.
later, but you can't, we don't have that technology
and
yet,
that's what perspective that I'm coming from. With those two biological realities, I think that they are important. I think they're amazing. I think men and women and boys and girls are supposed to complement one another, that being a boy, being a girl should be celebrated, that these are necessary distinctions for actually the existence of all human life, and taking someone down the journey of trying to identify as or be something that they biologically aren't.
Now, because she is so binary minded and conditioned, she can't accept the fact that people's brains can be formed so they identify maybe differently to some extent, lesser or greater extent, than their physical body was made. And so you'll find out in a later video, she actually rates the flesh above the soul and the mind of a person, saying, well, your flesh dictates whether you're a male or woman, male or female, and there's no such thing as anything in between. And that is very easy to debunk, but it's very hard for people like her to hear it. And that's the difficulty here. So you hear her saying they're trying to do something which is impossible. Well, I'm a woman of transgender experience, and I know full well my journey into womanhood was very different from the cisgender woman that got female body parts and her brain identified with those body parts, and she went through life as a woman. So I'm not pretending to her that I've followed that same pathway. I haven't at all. And that's why you find Desmond saying, well, yeah, there's transgender women. You may not have got there the same way as you did, but they're still women. And I say this because I totally believe that the spirit of a person and their soul, it rates higher and is more important than the flesh, not the other way around.
Is not just damaging for them, is damaging to the concept of truth as a whole, and is damaging to society when we'll get to that, when it looks at, women's sports and women's spaces and women's privacy, this blurring of the lines, this self-declaration, self-identification that I can be whatever I say that I am and my biology means nothing. I think it is absolutely destructive for society. So whether or not someone is happy about their transition is almost irrelevant to me.
And here we're about to see where her doctrinal beliefs cut in above the medical reasoning.
Wow. Okay, so I have a really good question to go on after this one. Is sex assigned at birth, Or is it established at conception and recognized before or after?
Oh,
You want to go?
Oh, no.
I can go first, or you can go.
Oh, no, you should go first.
Okay.
And we will repeat that question and continue it in the second video.